Well, without God, it's all relative. You have no absolutes. You say that this is right, and he says that that's wrong. How do you resolve that? Hello? Your God solution doesn't solve that either. You're pretending to have solutions to problems that you don't have. Religion has no viable solution to this problem. Why do I care what your God is? I say you need to make a demonstration that there's some good reason for me to listen to authority. I'm Matt, and I'm an enemy of religion. Uh, that's probably all the introduction I ever need or want. I'm an enemy of all religions equally. I despise Christianity, Islam, Scientology. I'm not an enemy of Scientology. I'm just a person. Uh, the It says in your program, and I got a copy, so I know it says it, that I'm here to talk about the superiority of sexual immorality. Atheists are liars. Uh, Here's what happened really briefly. They asked me if I do that talk, and I said, yeah, I'd love to. And then I looked at the schedule, and it's 30 minutes. And for those of you who've seen it, it's online, by the way. It's an hour, and I've taken questions for 2 hours after. By the way, who here already has a question that they wanted to ask me? Okay, so there's at least a couple, because I'm going to try and make sure that I get the questions. I desperately tried to sort the talk. It just wasn't working. Morality is a big deal. And it's really hard to put together in 20 minutes. This is the way you form a concise secular moral system. And by the way, we disagree on a lot of this amongst ourselves. During PZ's talk, the subject of objective morals came up. I happen to think that we can have objective moral values. And I talked about that as well. But let me tell you a little bit about what's been going on and why I find this topic so important. As Kelly mentioned, I ended up doing a lot of debates on the TV show because it's a live call-in show. 6 years of that, and you can pretty much answer anything, or at least bullshit your way through the ones that you can answer. But it's not the same debating with somebody on the phone as it is debating with somebody in person. And it's definitely different from debating in a formal environment like at a university. And I've been doing more and more of those for the last couple of years. The first debate was at UMBC against an Orthodox priest named Father Hans Jacobsi. And the subject was the source of human morality. And Jacobsi was really interesting because throughout the entire debate, I spoke first and he spoke last, and he agreed with me on everything. He was acknowledging that yes, secular people can reach correct moral positions through purely secular means. And I was kind of dumbfounded because I had come to debate. I might be a little bit of a firebrand sometimes, and I was looking forward to him saying something that just was crazy. I wish, actually, because in his closing remarks, which came at the end of the debate, where I wouldn't be able to respond, I saw the most bizarre Jekyll and Hyde transformation I had ever witnessed. I kid you not, you can watch the debate online. After agreeing with me, after saying that Matt's not like these other atheists because he's an honest truth seeker, like the rest of you aren't. Get on the ball. We got to find that truth stuff. After talking about what a nice guy I was and how I'm the kind of person that he'd like to go out and have a beer with and talk about stuff, he gets up in his closing. I'm obsessed by the outfit he had on. He gets up in his closing and says, first of all, he started ranting about porn for just out of the blue. And the audience was like, what's going on? And then he said in no uncertain terms, secularism necessarily leads to eugenics, gulags, and Nazis. And I lost my shit. Because I can't answer him. Thank you. Come on in. The debate at this point is effectively over, except there's a Q&A session, and I love me some Q&A. And fortunately, the second question, or maybe the third question that came in, was basically somebody who had watched my mouth drop and wanted to give me the opportunity to address this pious old fool. And they basically asked, "Hey, what do you think of this closing?" Which they phrased it a little bit better than that, but I went ahead with it, and I said that I educated him very nicely that there was no way in hell I would drink beer with anybody who was so dishonest has to flip-flop like that, agree with me through an entire debate, and then in the closing that I couldn't respond to, do one of the most immoral things I've ever seen, which is lie about seculars. They like that. He did. Continuing the trend of debates about morality, I debated Mark Setti, I think his name was, I may have it wrong, in Gainesville, Georgia, on can you do it without God? And yeah, you can. And Mark said so, right? The debate. He completely agreed. Of course, secular people can do good. Everybody knows this, by the way. There is no real debate on this subject. And what we've seen in recent years is those who are attacking morality, and I'll talk about what they actually say, are taking a different tack on this now. They agree. Of course, you can be a moral person. And Mark agreed with me. Mark and I got along famously. We agreed on like everything. There was no debate there. And Mark and I did go out and have a drink afterwards, because I like people who agree with me. I mean, how can you argue with a demonstration of sagacity like that? I also like people who don't agree with me, and I didn't want to be the guy who just debated morality. I'm walking a lot because my knee hurts. I went to a debate in Amarillo, where I was debating in Amarillo, with a guy by the name of Abdul Murray, and the subject this time was something that nobody ever suggested we debate before, and it was, should America be a nation under God? And I was thrilled. Yes, I don't have to debate morality again. I get to debate something. It's not, does God exist? It's not, is the Bible true? It's not, did Jesus exist? Which I can't wait for the talks in Russian. It's a should question. Should America be a nation under God? And I prepared and got all ready, and it's picked up all the arguments. And Abdul got up in his opening remarks and said, yes, we should be a nation under God, because the Declaration of Independence says so. It says that we have inalienable rights that are guaranteed by God. Oh, yeah. And without God, we can't be moral. And we spent the rest of the day debating morality. You'll sense a trend, because I am as well. 2 weeks ago, I had the great privilege of debating in Texas, in Frisco, Texas. J.C. Everhart and I teamed up against two philosophy theologians. I don't know. This time the subject was, does God exist? And I won't go, the main should is you get tomorrow. Didn't I say we're going to post it tomorrow, maybe? Someday. I love me some student groups, but boy, you guys and your timetable. It's all right. Study, it's more important. So we did the debate, and basically the opening, there were two, we each had 10 minutes, and they went first. And they presented 8 formal, structured arguments for the existence of God. And I was like, yeah. And 2 of them were the moral argument. Each of them presented their own version of the moral argument. That's how important this is. That's how much of a big sticking point this is. Last week, because I'm a tireless son of a gun, I was debating in Binghamton, New York, a guy by the name of Jay Lucas. And this time the topic was also, does God exist? I tried to pick up the slack that I had let JT do some of the heavy lifting in the other debate on the specifics, while I went after kind of the debate at a meta level. And so I had to do all that work by myself. I think I'm just taking it with me wherever I go. I got to get through, Beth, and put you the right way. So I named Jay Lucas on Does God Exist? You'll believe this, because, well, I'm honest, and I've told this story with hadn't got here, but Jay's a presuppositionalist. Oh, there's the groans. I don't know why precepts bother to debate the existence of God if all you're going to do is stand up and say that God exists, and I'm beginning with that. I don't know why they picked precepts to debate with me, because I came prepared for something else. We have 20-minute opening statement. By the way, there's something backwards about debates. Anybody else is doing debates? We need to make opening statements about 5 and the first rebuttal about 20, because they can say so much in a minute that you can't possibly respond to. Jay got up and said, Jay gave a 20-minute sermon on how God is required in order for us to be moral. That was it. There wasn't a thing in there about God exists.
The religious moral argument collapses fast because even believers know non-believers can be good. Atheists donate, raise families, help strangers, tell the truth, and build peaceful lives without needing a command from God. That proves morality does not come from religion. It comes from human well-being, empathy, reason, and consequences. Christianity tries to claim moral ownership, but the Bible itself contains slavery laws, violent punishments, and commands that modern Christians quietly ignore. If people have to filter the Bible through modern ethics, then modern ethics is doing the real moral work. Religion is taking credit for progress it resisted.
My rebuttal, because I got up for the rebuttal and I said, so basically Jay's argument is God has to exist or we don't live in the world that I want to live in. And then I went on to address all of his claims about morality, because I mean, I didn't come here to debate morality, but I will, because that's the trend. I mentioned all this, and it was back when, by the way, Jay also made the appeal to gulags. Drives me crazy. Jay's a nice guy. The Father Jenks isn't dead. But Jay's a nice guy because he came out of this from the beginning and was honest. And this is his sincere position. And by the way, he's not an idiot. I wasn't an idiot for the 20 some odd years I was a Christian. I was just wrong. And you can make an argument that I'm smarter now, depending on how you find smarter based on, knowledge and understanding. But don't make the mistake of believing that everybody who believes is a Christian. I was actually talking to John Loftus earlier about the possibility that some of the smarter people are the ones who are really most significantly entrenched in their beliefs. Most deluded, yeah. Because I think it's crazy enough, you can't ration your way through it. I can't get reason through this because it's so crazy. But I found another debate upcoming in Campus, British Columbia, the Imagine No Religion 2 conference, and I'm paired with Krista Carlos, who some of you may be familiar with. And this debate is going to be on the existence of God, but I bet it's on morality. And so I'm preparing for morality. The point is, this isn't going away. This is a big deal. This is a major sticking point, even though it should be. And I called Beth after the debate and I said, what the hell is going on? Why am I the morality guy? Why am I, people show up and it's like they watched the previous debate and didn't, when Father James was getting booed by the audience, they thought that was a good idea. So let's go back and talk about gulags again. Who thinks like that? And my wife, being a little wiser than I, by the way, Godless Bitches, I have to promote her podcast. It's amazing. Those are the three women I love more than anybody, well, almost anybody else. My wife Beth, and then Tracy and Jen from the show. They're doing amazing stuff. But she reminded me that the moral argument is what kept me a theist the longest. There was a period of time my uncle was a medical missionary. Some of you may have heard the story. He was the wisest Christian in our family and the person anybody would go to when they had questions. And I had a roommate who was an atheist at the time. And even though we agreed not to discuss it, I went to my uncle and I said, hey, I got my roommate. He's an atheist. What do I do about that? I really I love this guy. I don't want to see him in hell. I'm a Christian at the time. I'd been kind of backslidden, but I didn't want my best friend to end up in hell. And my uncle looked at me and said, ask him where he gets his morals from. And I went, well, duh. That's amazing. This is where my head was. This is where their head is. It's obvious. It was when he said it, it was like light bulbs went off, and now it's like I stepped in manure. I don't understand. I can put my Christian thinking cap back on for a number of issues, and I can get up and sermonize. And during the debate with Jay, we went around and round about slavery, where he flat out lied, and I started quoting the Bible and even asked to borrow his. But I can't put myself back in that mindset on every issue. And this one about morality is probably one of the biggest ones where it's painful. I can't even remember how or why I thought that way. And I think it's because I didn't used to think about it. What religion does? Religion has controlled the conversation on morality for just about as long as we've been able to think about morality. It makes all the definitions. It sets the playing field. And it does so because it offers the illusion of certainty and the comfort of simplicity. Murder's wrong. God said so. Boom, I'm done thinking about it. Boy, this morality stuff's really easy, isn't it? Man. The truth is, morality can be really difficult. There's a lot of things that we can sort out that are relatively simple. We can get the murder thing done, but we're going to keep having debates for a long time about all these gray zone issues, and it's not going to get any easier. When we start advancing scientifically, where we can do things that affect how humans interact and how we define identity, there's a big mess coming. And we've got to break free of these antiquated ideas. You can build a secular moral system from very, very simple beginnings. You can begin with things like life is generally preferable to death, pleasure is generally preferable to pain, health is generally preferable to sickness. And it doesn't matter one bit if these are ultimately arbitrary things that we plucked out of nowhere, or if they're intuitions, or if they're about our, you don't do that, or if they're about our emotions. It doesn't matter where this came from. We hang on to them because they've proved to be useful and true. We evaluate the consequences of our actions with respect to specific goals. That's how we determine right and wrong. It's not a simple, I don't like that, that's wrong. It's a lot more complex than that. But it's not so complex that we're stuck. There's a lot of objections that religionists will lodge at secular morals. One of them is that without God, you have no objective standards. I completely disagree. The truth about human interaction isn't contingent on any single line. I'm being very specific with my subjective and objective definitions here. When I say that something is subjective, that means it's contingent on a single line. I think it's objective if it's not. And that what I mean by that is that we're physical beings who occupy a physical universe. The laws of the universe control how we interact, control how we think, what we do. And if I set you on fire, it's the physical laws of the universe that are determining everything about that action. And we assess it objectively. If we lived in a universe where fire didn't burn, but was, cooling and pleasant and orgasmic, all of a sudden that wouldn't be immoral. Um, I think you can have objective standards. I think that well, let me get to the second objection, which is tied to this, which is, well, without God, it's all relative. You have no absolutes. You say that this is right, and he says that that's wrong. How do you resolve that? Hello, your God solution doesn't solve that either. You're pretending to have solutions to problems that you don't have. Religion has no viable solution to this problem. The only place where you can possibly find a viable solution is in secular moral systems. Every religion disagrees with every other religion. And then within a religion, you've got denominations that disagree. And then within denominations, you've got churches that disagree. And within churches, you've got people that disagree. And by the way, even if that wasn't the case, even if religion was some monolithic God said so, guess what? God said so. I disagree. Solve that conflict. Why do I care?
Religion sells easy answers because easy answers are powerful. God said so sounds strong until you ask which God, which book, and which interpretation. Christianity cannot even solve that inside its own churches. Baptists, Catholics, Pentecostals, and Protestants disagree on moral issues while claiming guidance from the same God. The Bible also allows slavery in passages like Exodus 21 and Leviticus 25, so pretending Christianity gives perfect morality is dishonest. Secular morality is better because it asks a real question. Does this action reduce harm or increase suffering? That is how adults handle morality.
Why do I care what your God has to say? You need to make a demonstration that there's some good reason for me to listen to the authority. And how do you do that? You do it by evaluating the consequences of actions and goals. You consider the effect of things on human beings, and you use reason and evidence. The power of a secular moral system is that it is data driven. It is able to correct itself. We can begin with those foundational principles, and if we find out any of them are wrong, any of them, including, something that seems as obvious as life is preferable to death, we can change them. If it turned out, maybe we find out something about reality that there is some kind of afterlife, and now death is preferable to life, and we've uprooted our foundation, and we've done so based on evidence. If you do it before you get the evidence, you're a moron. This idea that there's no absolutes is also wrong, because within any specific situation, and there's no absolute, it's not one absolute moral answer that addresses every situation. But within a specific situation, I think there are absolutes. And that's because in a given situation, there's a finite pool of possible actions that one can take. We can compare the results of those actions with each other. Some of them are going to be better, and some of them are going to be worse, which means by definition, there is some subset of actions that represent the moral pinnacle for that particular situation. We may not have the first clue what it is, but we're never going to find out if we accept somebody else's bold-faced lie assertion about what it is. We have to explore, we have to investigate. We have been building off of what everybody before us has learned. If you pull up a mid-game chess position and you ask a bunch of people, what's the best move? You might get a variety of answers. And they could be right. Doesn't necessarily have to be one right answer. We could get a couple not so good answers, a couple optimal answers. But by and large, we're able to determine which answers are better and right. And it's the people, it's the experts that have studied chess who are able to see further. And they're the best ones at determining which moves are the right moves. The fact that there are multiple right answers doesn't mean that we just throw up our hands and forfeit the game. We've won. The fact that there are multiple right answers means we're winning. And it's the same thing is true, even though this is a common religious objection to morality is, well, you say this is right, he says that's right. Yeah, you know what? We can both be right. This isn't about just one simple, absolute cut and dried path. That's the lie that religion has forced upon the world. And it's really difficult to get past this. In the time we got today, I can't get into all of it. I do want to remind you that the whole talks is actually available online. But when we're kids, we ask why. A lot of times we got that because I said so. That's religion. Religion is offering because I said so. And that answer might have been fine in humanity's infancy. But we're grown-ups now. We're not, we don't know everything, but we ought to know enough. Because I say so is not a satisfying answer. The reason it's not satisfying is because when we ask why, what we're looking for is an explanation, something with explanatory power that increases our understanding. Because I said so and God did it, those are pointless little platitudes. They're filler. They're filler. I don't want to answer your question. I don't have to answer your question. I don't have an answer to your question, but I'm damn sure going to pretend that I have one. And it's because I said so. We talk about why secular morality is superior. It's because we say so. And I don't mean that in a morally relativistic way. I mean that we say so. And the reason we say so is because we have learned, we've been able to, build off of the foundations that other people have left us and learn what works and what doesn't. And we also understand that we've got a lot more to learn. One of the best principles about secular moralities is that not only is it about getting better, but it's about getting better at getting better. We can revise every aspect of what we believe and what we understand, and it's all done based on evidence. Religious models, how do they deal with conflict? Coercion, conquest. It's not data-driven. It's not evidence-based. It's all because I said so. And because I said so is a terrible answer. It's unsatisfying. But because we say so is empowering. We're all participants in this system. Secular moral systems are internally driven. Non-secular systems are externally driven. There's no guarantee that the needs of the participants in the system are being looked after in any way by a non-secular system. It's somebody else's opinion. I'm doing this for your own good. Well, I'm sure you think so, but are you really? And is that what's actually coming out of it? I don't know you, I'm sick of being viewed as a person of questionable moral character by people who support criminal organizations that shield child rapists from prosecution. I'm not a second-class citizen to anybody who sanctions honor killings. I'm not a second-class citizen. They don't have any moral high ground if they're fighting against all forms of equality, if they're retarding scientific progress, and if they're refusing medical treatment that results in kids dying, while simultaneously propping up those institutions as the best moral standards. It might be the best that they've got to offer, but the rest of us have something more to offer. They can stand in their swamp all day and claim that they have it on good authority, that they are in the best position, but we have the moral high ground. This battle has been fought and won. We are an evidence-based society. We understand what we can do with regard to morality. And whenever I'm in a debate, I'm gonna cheat just a little bit here. Um, Whenever I'm in a debate and there is gulags, there's a part of me that just wants to go nuts. There's a part of me that wants to say, "Well, Christianity rates child rape. That's just as truthful as what you said." But I'm more moral than they are, because I understand that Christianity doesn't actually have any tenets that lead to child rape, so I won't say it does. But what I will say is that it certainly doesn't have anything in it that prevents child rape. And meanwhile, we have example after example of all of these religious atrocities, all while these people are running around singing hosannas and talking about how those dirty, godless heathens just can't be moral. You're just wrong. We have the moral high ground, absolutely. I'm going to let questions get out here, but I want to kind of end on a positive note, and that is the superior secular moral system is something that is not only true, but we know it's true because we can observe the religious. Religions don't still have the same view of morality that they used to. They've changed based on what the society that's changed around them, based on these secular views. They already acknowledge that our way is better. It's just that they're so entrenched in their way that they take these secular moral positions and say, "This is my new external source," and then cover it up and slap, God on it or insight from Jesus. They're already agreeing to this. In the future, religions most of them are going to catch up. It happens all the time. And they'll color it and paint personal interpretation on it. But this is just a simple win, a straight up win. They already acknowledge that the secular path is the best path. What we need to do is encourage people that they don't have to be stealth secularists. You can actually be involved in the process. Yes, it's difficult. And I know that talks about morality and debates can cause conflict and be very, very difficult for people to deal with on occasion. But you could be a part of the process. And I am going to spend the rest of my life walking around at universities and in debates and on the TV show and on the podcast and maybe even occasionally on Godless Bitches, doing everything I can to make sure that religion never again gets to set the stage, define the terms, or get the last damn word. Thanks.
Religion fails because it cannot correct itself honestly. Secular morality can look at harm, study the results, admit mistakes, and change course. Religion starts with an answer and then tries to protect it. That is how churches defended slavery, blocked science, covered abuse, fought equality, and still claimed moral authority. Christianity says morality comes from God, but the real world shows something different. Moral progress happens when humans stop obeying old authority and start measuring suffering. Evidence fixes bad ideas. Faith preserves them. That is why secular morality is stronger.
So one topic that comes up over and over again is morality. It doesn't matter what topic you start discussing, if you're having conversations with believers, eventually morality is likely to come up. I've done a number of big formal debates, some of them where morality was the designated topic and others where it wasn't. And in almost every single one of them, at some point, we ended up talking about morality. So what is this morality thing? Why do we care about it? Why is it the go-to argument for so many conversations with believers? Let's take a look. So the conversation about morality has been so muddled and confused by religious doctrine and language that sometimes we can't even agree what we're talking about. And sometimes the label gets in the way. There's confusion over whether we're talking about morals or ethics or secular morality. Where does morality come from? Why do we care about any of this? And generally, I think that what we're talking about is how we go about surviving and thriving in the world, with a recognition that we are going to share space with other people, that the actions that I take are going to have consequences for myself and for others. And this is true for other people as well. And we'd like to go through and analyze what is our best course of action. And even saying that, one of the first things that people will try to suggest is, well, who decides what's best? Well, really nobody. Nobody decides what's best. My view on this, and there are lots of different views about solutions to the moral questions, but my view is that reality is the ultimate arbiter of what's right or wrong. I mean, when we look at how we live in the world, we are physical beings in a physical universe that dictates what the consequences of our action is going to be, as far as we can tell. And that should be enough to evaluate, hey, this action helps me thrive. Does it hurt other people? This action helps all of us thrive. This action really diminishes our well-being. This action diminishes our ability to survive and thrive. It's reality that is, as far as I can tell, the ultimate arbiter of what is right and what is wrong. But we're a part of that. We are the being within this. We're the ones that are taking action. We're the ones that are evaluating those actions. And it's not just about evaluating actions and the consequences, because motivation and intent come into it as well. If I back over you with the car, was that moral or not? Well, it depends on a lot of things. Did I know you were there? If knowing you were there and backing over you with the car, does that make it immoral? What if it was an accident? What if I thought I had it in drive and I accidentally backed over you? There's something about the intent and our motivations that colors the action and the consequences of those actions. And that's what makes morality so complicated. The world is robust. Things change. We're living in a dynamic universe. And what we need to do is consider each situation independently to create generalized assessments of actions that we then use as a sort of litmus test for future actions so that we can make better decisions. But we need to do it with the recognition that we cannot just assess one situation and assume that it's going to apply to every similar situation, because there's sometimes extenuating circumstances. Morality is a big, hairy, complex topic, and it confuses a lot of people, but it's also the source of a lot of fears. So while I look at reality as the ultimate arbiter of what's morally correct and what's morally incorrect, one of the most common questions is, where do you get your morals from? And I cite reality, but I'd like to ask theists, where do you get your morals from? This is the argument for morality that they try to propose, and it has a number of different forms. But the core of it is that somewhere out there, outside of reality, I don't even know what that means, there is some being that serves as the foundation for their morality. Why? Why is it that when we're talking about how our actions, how our motivations help to build a better world or detract from our world, why is it that some being or entity outside of all of this, who's not a part of this system, serves as the ultimate source for their morality? There's a number of questions that we can follow up with, and we'll get to those a little bit later. But there seems to be this idea that morality is something that's given to you or that is innately recognizable. I've given a number of examples over the years of how some of this is actually wrong. If you have two kids who are out to dinner and they're misbehaving and their parents take them home, and one of the kids, there's told, next time we go out, if you're good, you'll get a treat. And if you're bad, you'll get a spanking or you'll get some punishment. And the other kid is sat down and they explain that, hey, there are other people around you. How would you feel if you were one of those people and someone was behaving the way you were behaving? Wouldn't that be a disruption to your meal? Wouldn't that be annoying? Wouldn't that be something that you would rather not see happen? And we've given one of the children a a foundation based on empathy, based on the facts, based on what we would desire, what we suspect other people might desire. And you go back out to dinner the next time, both of those kids are going to behave. But which one is more moral? This is where the motivations and the understanding come into it as well. I think it should be clear to almost everybody that the one kid who's doing it for the reward and to avoid punishment is, while his actions are the same, his morality is inferior. His motivation is inferior. And it's inferior because once you remove the carrot and stick motivation, once the parents are not in the picture, which one of those kids is more likely to behave? Because they actually understand this. And that's not the only example that we can use. I'm someone, when I drive around in traffic, I try to think about the other people on the road. I try to be courteous. And that makes me perhaps hyper aware of people who are being discourteous, people who are being inconsiderate and don't care and think that they own the road and they're not aware of anyone else around them. How do we go about setting up the rules that we should follow when we're driving around? This is roughly analogous to some views of morality in that, well, you should use turn signals because this lets people, become aware of your intent, whether it's to change lanes or to turn. You should drive within the limits of the law as far as speed goes. And when we construct these rules, we're not actually constructing moral strictures. When we're talking about traffic and motor vehicles anyway, we're trying to create a set of rules that allow people to get from point A to point B safely, quickly, and efficiently. We're allowed to change those rules, to try new things. They're not set in stone. In the early 70s, as a part of the oil crisis, the United States set up a nationwide maximum speed limit of 55 miles per hour. It lasted for a couple of decades, actually, before it was repealed. It didn't actually save as much fuel as they expected it was going to. That was a consideration because there's more to driving than just getting from A to B. Your actions on the road have effects on the atmosphere, and on oil prices and the economy. It didn't save as much fuel as they thought it was going to, but they kept it even after the fuel crisis was over because there was this idea that it saved lives, that it made driving safer. And there's data that suggests that that may have been the case in some scenarios, and there's data that suggests that wasn't the case, that perhaps the decrease in road fatalities was due to improvements in motor vehicles, so that it wasn't necessarily the speed limit. And there's data that shows that in some cases where the speed limit is higher, deaths have dropped there. So we experimented, found out that this maybe isn't the best way. So we'll let the states decide what their speed limits are going to be. And we've kind of gone back to what we had. This is the advantage of a secular moral system as well. It has at its center the goal of getting better at getting better. And so it allows us to say, you know what, we've had these principles. We've started with some simple foundations, for example, that life is generally preferable to death and health is preferable to sickness and pleasure is preferable to pain. And we recognize that there are exceptions to those generalized rules and that those rules come in conflict, that we're talking about this dynamic, robust world that we live in. And so there's not necessarily a one-size-fits-all.
Christian morality teaches people to obey first and understand later. That is weak morality. If a child behaves only because they fear punishment or want a reward, they have not learned compassion. They have learned control. Secular morality is stronger because it teaches people to think about harm, empathy, and real consequences. That is why God said so is such a poor answer. It gives commands without explanation. A mature moral system can test ideas, change bad rules, and improve. Religion freezes morality in ancient authority and then calls obedience virtue.
But we can come up with basic rules that serve as guidelines to help us come up with better rules down the line. But if we can't agree on simple things like, hey, it's better if we didn't just allow people to run around killing each other. If we can't agree on something like that, then we're kind of stuck. And this is one of the many fears that prey upon religious individuals. Religions exploit this sort of fear. Oh my gosh, it's all just a matter of opinion. Anything goes. It's all subjective. It's cats and dogs. We're all going to die just because we may not all necessarily agree on something. Do they have a solution for that? So there's a number of different versions of the argument from morality. There's a formal version that is, if morality is objective and absolute, then there must be a God. Morality is objective and absolute, therefore there must be a God. Now, this version of the argument is the more formalized one. It doesn't tell you anything at all about who this God is, what this God wants. It just tries to make a case that because morality is objective and absolute, there must be a God. Well, there's two premises there. The first one, if morality is objective and absolute, there must be a God. Is that the case? Is it impossible? Have they demonstrated that it's impossible to have an objective and absolute morality without a God? I don't see that that's ever been done. In fact, when you get into those conversations and you try to talk about whether or not morality is objective or whether there are any absolutes, and I'm talking about absolutes even in the context of situations, that within this situation, there's a finite set of actions one can take, and so some set of one or more actions must represent the moral pinnacle or the moral absolute for that situation. Whether you subscribe to that situational morality or not, that could be viewed as an absolute. It's not the same as the absolutes that religionists often use, which is that, oh, there's this one size fits all, this is absolutely wrong and always wrong, and there's no extenuating circumstances. So the first premise, if morality is absolute and objective, there must be a God, is something that nobody's ever demonstrated. And they don't try to. Instead, they'll shift the burden of proof, say, well, how do you get objective and absolute moral standards without a God? Well, just because I don't have an answer to that, and I think that I might, depending on definitions, doesn't mean that they're correct, that the only solution, or even the best solution, is to appeal to some God. The second premise of that argument is that morals are, in fact, objective and absolute. Well, have they established this? I'm not aware that they've established this, at least not in the context that they tend to be talking about, that there's some standard that's completely independent of us and our desires, that is absolute and not dependent upon situations or anything else like that. So this simplified formal version of the argument has two premises, and both of them are dubious at best. That's not much of an argument. And even if they weren't dubious, even if they were to be reasonable, reliable premises, it doesn't tell you anything at all about this God other than this is the source of morality. And if that's all you know about it, why call it God? Why not just say that there must be some external source for morality and we don't know what it is? So there are other versions of the argument for morality as well, the kind of informal versions. One of them is this idea that it doesn't actually demonstrate that a God exists. It tries to argue for the necessity of a God. And basically, it's if there is no God, then everything is subjective and it's all chaos and it's all up to whatever anybody wants to do. And oh my gosh, it's a catastrophe. And the argument basically boils down to, if there isn't a God, this isn't the type of world I want to live in. Well, the type of world you want to live in has no bearing on the type of world you actually do live in. This isn't an argument for the existence of God. It's an argument for, boy, oh boy, I really wish there was a God because I'm absolutely terrified of the consequences if there isn't one. So the third version of the argument for morality that I want to address is one where the basic claim is that we observe a moral order, some sort of uniformity of moral assessment that we all share, that we all have some innate sense of right and wrong. And that the best explanation for this shared sense of morality is that there is some external source, which is then God. Now, I don't know how they got to the idea that this is in fact the best explanation. I've talked about what are the odds before, trying to determine that there must be some sort of supernatural source or supernatural foundation for these things. I don't see any justification for it. I don't even know how you could begin to calculate or assess that. But what's worse is that their claim simply isn't true. Take a look at children. Children are taught right from wrong. They don't come prepackaged with a clear understanding of right and wrong. They develop this. They are taught, and hopefully they are taught well so that they exercise some empathy. They consider the consequences of their action. They think about what they would like to happen to them. And they also put themselves in the place of the other person to see what would happen, how they would feel if they were that other person. And then from there, we can move forward to actually talking to that other person to find out what they would like to have happen. This is where the ethics of reciprocity and the golden rule come into play. And I don't have a huge problem with the golden rule. I think in some versions, it's pretty decent. The version that Jesus came forward with, though, is actually not my favorite. It's not even close to my favorite, because that version is do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Now, that's an incredibly self-centered view of the world. It not only puts you in the position of being the ultimate moral arbiter, They will play it off as if God has given them this instruction. But the truth is that it puts you in the position of, I'm going to determine what's right, and I'm going to impose this on others as well, doing unto others as you would have done to you. Well, what if they don't want to be treated that way? What if they have different views? What if, you prefer blunt honesty and they prefer maybe some sugarcoating? Trying to treat people in the way that you would want to be treated is not necessarily best. Better versions of that ethic of reciprocity include things like do unto others as they would have you do unto them, with some limitations, because if somebody wants you to kill them, that may not necessarily be the most morally correct action. There's not a simple solution, and we shouldn't be trying to take these questions and make everything one size fits all. We have to recognize that the world is more complicated than that. And another thing that demonstrates that they're actually wrong about this shared intuitive understanding of morality is that views about morality have changed over the years. We no longer think that the same things are moral that used to be. They also vary between cultures, and they vary between time periods within different religions. It's why we end up with so many different denominations. They disagree on doctrine, they disagree on morality, they disagree on pretty much anything. Our views about what is and isn't right or wrong have changed. Now, why have they changed? Is it because the universe has changed? Well, perhaps somewhat, but I think my explanation is that they've changed because we have gotten better at understanding these things. We are building upon the thoughts of others. We are building upon the historic understanding of right and wrong, learning more about the consequences of actions, seeing further than we have before, and reevaluating what our positions are. What's the religious explanation for why things have changed? Are we becoming more in tune with God or less in tune with God? You'll hear that from both of them. Oh, the world's going to hell in a handbasket because we've fallen away from God. And yet, when you actually look at the state that the world's in, so far as I can tell, we live in pretty much the best time there ever has been in almost any measure. So I've mentioned a couple times in this video about fear, about how religion may be playing upon and exploiting the fears of believers. It may also be creating those fears. It's been said before that religion poisons you and then offers you the cure. And I prefer to say that religion convinces you that you're poisoned when you're actually not, and then offers you their homeopathic remedy. Either way, some of the fears that people have about morality and about how can we have a world if there's not a God and everything's just, oh, it's too scary. They're not real fears. They're not things that we find in reality. They're preventing us from having the sort of conversations that we're going to need to have. The world's going to become more complex. We're going to need to have more conversations about identity and bigger issues. And if we can't get together on some of the basics, that's going to make it difficult. And this is an objection that religions launch at secular moral systems. So what kind of objections do they launch? And how much merit is there? What is it that they're actually objecting to? And do they have a solution?
The moral argument for God is built on fear, not proof. Christians say, without God, anything goes, but that does not match reality. People do not need heaven or hell to understand that pain, abuse, murder, and cruelty damage human life. The Christian answer also fails because it never proves which God is the source of morality. It only assumes one. Even the golden rule in Matthew 7:12 is limited because it tells people to treat others how they want to be treated, instead of asking what the other person actually needs. Secular morality is more honest because it deals with reality, not fear.
So probably the most common objection that's launched at secular moral systems is something along the lines of, well, you say that this is moral and somebody else says that this is immoral. How do you resolve that conflict? You've got nothing to point to. Well, how do theists resolve that conflict? It's exactly the same. They're saying that something is immoral and people don't agree with them. And so they would try to point to their standard being their holy book or their deity or their personal interpretation of their holy book or what their deity wants. Their objection seems to be that we don't have an objective standard to point to, and neither do they. The truth is, all they can point to is their assessment, their opinion, or their book to say, this is what it says, or this is what I think it says. And ultimately, someone's either going to agree with them or they're not. They are stuck in exactly the same dilemma that they are objecting to. their objection doesn't hold any water. And this is true for nearly every single objection that theists ever raise about the subject of morality. And part of the reason for this is that we haven't solved this issue of morality, and we may never. It's a process. We live in a world that's changing. There's too much information for us to even assess. To pretend that there's some simple solution that comes from on high may actually muddy the waters to the point that the entirety of the subject is more confusing and more complex than it was in the first place. Perhaps we could begin with simpler beginnings and build. I'd argue that that's exactly what we've done throughout history, that it's almost intuitive to recognize that, hey, I'd kind of like to keep on living. I like this. It's kind of fun. It's beautiful out. I'd rather be experiencing this than, not. I'd rather be alive than dead. And that there are probably other people who feel the same way. In fact, we are the offspring of generations of people who have pretty much felt the same way. And that if this is the case, then it's in my best interest to encourage a society where people aren't considered moral for slaughtering me, and where I'm not considered moral for slaughtering them. These simple ideas that get to the heart of who we are in the world that we inhabit are the foundations upon which we build things. The problem is, thinking about moral issues, assessing the moral dilemmas that we're going to come across is difficult. It's hard work, and we're lazy. We would much rather have an answer spoon-fed to us, but it's not a satisfying answer, and it's not an answer that increases our understanding of reality or improves our understanding of morality if we just say, oh, because I said so, or because God said so, or because this book says so. If instead it's because these are the facts about reality, because these are the facts about who we are, you have a much more robust method for assessing moral dilemmas. So what is the takeaway from all of this? Whether or not the truth about morality is that it has some objective source, whether it's God or reality, or whether it's ultimately subjective, the arguments that theists present surrounding the issue of morality don't do anything to demonstrate that a God exists. They don't do anything to demonstrate a resolution to this problem of objective versus subjective morality. Every objection that they launch pretty much is one that they can't solve either. And we're all in this boat together. We all have things to investigate and to learn. And to pretend that we have the answers already, or that the answers have been delivered from on high, is a huge mistake. One of the first debates that I ever did, a big public formal debate, was against an Orthodox priest named Father Hans Jacobsi. And the subject was the source of human morality. Throughout the debate, he agreed with me. You can come to correct moral assessments using purely secular means, essentially agreeing with my position across the board until his closing remarks. And then he pulled one of the most amazing Jekyll and Hyde routines I've ever seen, where he got up and said that secular morality essentially necessarily leads to gulags and eugenics and all sorts of stuff that's just bad. It's fear-mongering. It's the sort of fear-mongering that I've talked about a little bit throughout the course of this video. Psalm 14:1 says, "The fool has said in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt. They can do no good works. There is none who does good." Some version of that has been bandied around, and people tend to remember, the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. I'm not calling you a fool. The Bible is. Ha, 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 you atheists. The second part of the verse gets ignored because it's so obviously wrong. It's claiming that those who don't believe in God can't do anything good. And yet here we are doing good all the time. Here we are with our secular charities, our humanistic efforts, our attempts to oppose a lot of the harm done by religions in the name of religion. It's gotten to the point where even in a debate, my opponents have agreed, well, of course you can be moral as an atheist. It's very rare nowadays to hear someone say, you atheists cannot be moral. It's very few, that would be in agreement with Psalm 14:1, but it's rare to actually hear that. It's become so clear that we can do it that they just kind of dismiss it. And instead, they'll move on to perhaps a passage from Romans saying that the reason that we can be good is because God has written his moral code in our heart. God is the reason why we can do good. We're borrowing from their worldview. And there's a number of different theistic worldviews about morality. There's the divine command theory that something is moral because God says so, because God dictates it. That way, if God decides to change his mind about what's moral, that can happen too. Another version, which we heard from Cy during my debate with him, was that it's about God's character and that it's not wrong to steal because God says so. It's wrong to steal because God isn't a thief. But this portrays this idea that we should be trying to be like God. That's kind of at the heart of a lot of religious views, particularly within Christianity. Be like God. Well, what would the world be like if there were 7 billion megalomaniacal thugs demanding worship, killing people, and and ordering people to be killed for picking up sticks or being drunk or being disrespectful to their parents, etc.? And the question that I like to ask Christians in particular is, how did you determine that God is the good one? Or that there is a good one? But for those who believe that God is good and the devil is evil, how did you come to that conclusion? What standard did you use to assess? Now, no matter what their answer is, unless they say, I haven't done the assessment, they're acknowledging that they are using their standard and making an assessment on their own. They're thinking about the issue in the same way that any of the rest of us would. What they'll often appeal to is this idea that they're judging God by the standard that he's written on his heart, on their hearts. But anybody would come out smelling like roses if they're judged against their own standard. If Satan wrote his standard on your heart and you judged him, you'd think he was morally perfect as well. There's no solution to that. This is the core, in some ways, of the Euthyphro dilemma. And while the Euthyphro dilemma was originally an assessment of piety, whether or not something is pious, it works just as well for morality. And that is something moral because God says so, or you could say because it's God's character, or does God say so because it's moral? If the former is true, if something's moral just because God says so, then now we're in the realm of capriciousness, that divine fiat, and whatever God says goes. So if God decides to say tomorrow that, killing and torturing people is morally correct, then that is so. And that leaves morality without any meaning. It is as devoid of meaning as anything theists would suggest on our part. But if the alternate is true, that that God says something because it is in fact moral, then that puts us in another position entirely. That means that there is some foundation for moral truths out there that can be discovered, and God becomes irrelevant to that. I didn't need a commandment to tell me that killing people was wrong. I just needed a little bit of empathy and a little bit of understanding of the consequences of my action and the fact that I'm sharing space with other people. Our ancestors did pretty much the same thing, but they codified some of it to keep people in line, to give people easy answers, to say this is the way things are going to be. And that trained us to not only rely on authorities, but to not do a very good job of thinking and evaluating these situations when we come across them. There's no easy answers to the complex questions that we see in various moral dilemmas, but we don't have to make it harder by pretending that we've found a simple answer when we absolutely have not.
Christian morality has a fatal flaw. It cannot explain why God is good without using human judgment first. If something is good only because God commands it, then cruelty could become good the moment God orders it. If God commands it because it is already good, then morality exists outside of God, and God is no longer needed. That destroys the whole argument. Secular morality does not need divine threats. It needs empathy, evidence, and the courage to admit when old rules fail. Religion turns morality into obedience. Reason turns morality into responsibility. So here's the question. If Christians already use human judgment to decide that God is good, why pretend morality comes from God at all? Drop your answer in the comments. And if you want more breakdowns like this, hit like and subscribe.